So, is free speech under attack? Short answer, yes. Long answer, yes, but with a lot more nuance than the conversation about it tends to hold, no matter which side of the political spectrum it's being discussed on. As I've detailed, the First Amendment has always been a contentious issue, in large part because whatever restrictions on speech can be legally enforced can be utilized in different ways and on different people, depending on who wields political power at that moment in history. We see political power wielded in such a manner through the waves of anti-LGBTQIA+ legislation that argue that queerness, with a particular focus on transness and gender nonconformity, is by its nature obscene, thereby attempting to legislate queerness out of society by using the First Amendment exception for censorship of obscenity. The speech of those who aim to silence and harm others is protected, creating a social environment where the speech of those targeted may in theory be equally protected, but where silencing them is legal through the use of fear and stigma, such as passing laws vague enough to be implemented in ways that the average citizen would be unable to understand in order to guard against. For example, terms like age-appropriate or instruction in something like the Parental Rights and Education Act, more commonly known as the Don't Say Gay Bill, create a culture of fear for many teachers, causing them to toe any line they have become worried might be punishable. Terms like these are highly malleable depending on who is interpreting them and for what reason. Even if the legal definition is set, terms like these create a way to manipulate public conversation about the passing of the law itself. That said, we shouldn't ignore that leftists can perpetuate similar cultures of fear around speaking up. The rhetoric of silence is violence demands everyone have a take on every issue. And not just have a take, but have what's believed by the loudest, angriest people to be the right take. In practice, this fails to consider those who are fatigued or overwhelmed, or any variety of reasons that may be personal, internal, political, or some other factor we can't know implicitly, as well as anyone simply feeling not certain they know what they're talking about, particularly in an age of rampant misinformation. Possibilities of experiencing dogpiling, public humiliation, harassment, or even contributing to the very harm they have felt pressured to speak up against are very real and valid realities to fear.
Pressure on celebrities to be vocal on a wide spectrum of issues transcends the boundaries of their chosen fields. Whether they're an actor, a musician, producer, athlete, that's not what they signed up for, and we should not impose those responsibilities on them. This relentless demand often extends beyond their areas of expertise, and pressuring them to navigate these areas with limited knowledge is just really unfair and just not called for. We don't need that. And yes, they can get educated and learn about what's happening, but so can all of we. We can all do that too. We shouldn't wait for celebrities to get educated on a certain issue and talk about it before we start paying attention to it.
Despite some sentiments on the American left, cancel culture is real. It just doesn't affect the people who yell about it the most. Figures like Dave Chappelle, J.K. Rowling, and Tucker Carlson have maintained highly influential platforms despite their supposed canceling. But the existence of long-term wide-scale harassment campaigns against people considered problematic is absolutely a real issue. ContraPoints has a great video on canceling as she experienced it herself, and it's amazing and heartbreaking how the American political left let their belief in their righteous mission against dangerous forces convince them they are absolved of their capacity to slide into harming marginalized groups and innocent people by simply considering certain kinds of behavior, rhetoric, and actions that the enemy has utilized not only acceptable, but righteous in the name of fighting said enemy. The actions of both the left and right alike could technically be defined as a form of censorship, since censorship, according to Britannica, is the changing or the suppression or prohibition of speech or writing that is deemed subversive of the common good. That said, as mentioned in Part 1, exceptions for when government censorship is considered necessary have existed in America almost as long as the laws created to prevent government censorship. Censorship has its place in maintaining a healthy society and a stable democracy, though unfortunately we've had to deal with a lot of bias and problematic policy in the creation of censorship laws, as well as non-government enforced decisions about speech. This is where monetary politics comes in. Some vocabulary needed for this discussion. When I use the term gatekeepers of speech, I'm referring primarily to the corporations, and specifically the executives of those corporations, that produce, host, and/or distribute information and expression. This obviously includes all social media platforms, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, I refuse to call it X, and so on, but it also includes entertainment studios like Disney, Netflix, and Warner Bros. Discovery, as well as news outlets like Fox News, The Washington Post, the BBC, the New York Times, and the Hollywood Reporter. I'm sure there are plenty of others as well that I'm not currently thinking of, but generally the gatekeepers of speech decide what speech or expression gets prioritized through what I call monetary politics. Monetary politics is the term I've coined to describe the analysis of risk versus reward of impact on the bottom line that speech and expression gatekeepers use to decide which speech is moderated, which is protected, which is given an algorithmic microphone, and which is shuffled off into the corner. There are many ways that monetary politics is implemented among the various gatekeepers of speech, depending on the business model the gatekeeper profits from, their public brand, and how they operate their services for their customers. The decisions about speech that come from those monetary politics then often surface as the way that non-gatekeepers are forced to navigate the gatekeeper's commitment to brand safety, legal risk, algorithmic reach, access to the services the gatekeeper provides, lawsuits, monetization abilities, and the operation of copyright protection systems and complaint responses, among other limits or privileges the gatekeeper can apply when they feel it's necessary. Social media, especially social media with global user bases such as Twitter or YouTube, has sometimes been compared to what's legally known as a public forum, as a way to make sense of how their role in how speech should operate can be handled. This is complicated, as these are privately owned businesses, yet it is true that the spaces they operate resemble public spaces more than they do private ones, with some exceptions that we will touch on soon. First, let's go over the rights we are guaranteed in a public forum, then we can see how those rights do or don't hold up on social media. As detailed by the ACLU on their page Know Your Rights,
your rights are strongest in what are known as traditional public forums, such as streets, sidewalks, and parks. You also likely have the right to speak out on other public property, like plazas in front of government buildings, as long as you are not blocking access to the government building or interfering with other purposes the property was designed for.
The ACLU goes on to detail that police must treat protesters and counter-protesters equally, and that they have equal rights to free speech, but that law enforcement is permitted to keep antagonistic groups separated, though they should allow them to be within sight and sound of one another. The ACLU also notes that there are some instances where a protest requires a permit. Marches or parades that require blocking traffic or street closure, a large rally requiring the use of sound-amplifying devices, or a rally over a certain size at most parks or plazas. While certain permit procedures require submitting an application well in advance of the planned event, police can't use those procedures to prevent a protest in response to breaking news events, and restrictions on the route of a march or sound equipment might violate the First Amendment if they are unnecessary for traffic control or public safety, or if they interfere significantly with effective communication to the intended audience. Nor can a permit be denied because the event is controversial or will express unpopular views. What the ACLU makes clear here is that while officials can't prevent speech entirely, there are restrictions that can be put in place in order to preserve public safety. This becomes relevant when we address the two biggest differences between genuine public forums and social media platforms thanks to their private interests: algorithms and Section 230. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act was passed in 1996, and according to Casey Newton at The Verge, it states,
"An interactive computer service can't be treated as the publisher or speaker of third-party content. This protects websites from lawsuits if a user posts something illegal. Although there are exceptions for copyright violations, sex work-related material, and violations of federal criminal law. Senator Ron Wyden and Representative Chris Cox crafted Section 230 so website owners could moderate sites without worrying about legal liability. This law is particularly vital for social media networks, but it covers many sites and services, including news outlets with comment sections, like The Verge."
Basically, publishers in the traditional sense, such as news outlets, are legally liable for the material that they publish. So in order to allow the internet to flourish in its infancy, Section 230 was established to draw a line between speech that a platform hosts and speech that they publish. While this arguably was a good move in the infancy of the internet, today, Section 230 is far more controversial. With the immense power many social media platforms hold these days, and the way that they have informed the modern political landscape, how they moderate the material they host has become an increasingly large concern. Due to Section 230, they are isolated from the consequences of that material. And to avoid any situations that might cause lawmakers to determine their control over the material on their platform makes them essentially publishers, most platforms stay out of moderating anything that they believe, you guessed it, won't lose them any money. While I don't wish to imply that no one at these companies care about making their platforms better and safer, the biases in moderation decisions are undeniable. First, let's talk about Sniper Wolf and Jax Films. Jax Films is a YouTuber and sketchwriter who has been on YouTube practically since its inception, and Sniper Wolf is what's known as a reaction YouTuber who, well, watches stuff other people makes and reacts. There is a whole other conversation to be had about reaction videos and whether they are transformative enough to be fair use, but this isn't the video for that. If you're on YouTube, you probably heard about this, and genuinely, if you want a better breakdown of what happened here, there are other videos that will do a better job of discussing the ethics and legality of Sniper Wolf's uploads, such as this video from Echo is Weird, or this video from Council of Geeks that covers some of the lead up to the situation I'm about to discuss, as well as YouTube's reaction to it, which is actually what I wish to talk about. So thanks Vera for such a great and helpful video. Jax Films has spent a lot of time criticizing Sniper Wolf's content output, and calling it lazy and unethical. I hate the term content, but from what I understand about what Sniper Wolf does, content output seems like an apt descriptor. A few months ago, at time of writing, Sniper Wolf lost her patience and decided to visit Jax Film's private residence unprompted and without his knowledge or consent, as well as exposing it to her millions of followers on Instagram. Now, as broken down by lawyer channel Legal Eagle, what Sniper Wolf did does not technically constitute a crime, and luckily it seems none of her fans have followed up on the information she exposed. Even so, it was absolutely not at all guaranteed that none of her millions of fans would have taken her accusations of Jax Films having some sort of intense obsession and harassing her, and decided to do something about the guy apparently being so mean to their favorite creator. What Sniper Wolf did rightly terrified Jax Films and his wife, and was, for all intents and purposes, doxing. Doxing is the term for exposing the private, identifying information of an individual on the internet without their consent. And despite quickly taking the Instagram story down, there is no reason to assume no one could have determined Jax Film's home through it and decided to cause him and his wife further distress over their safety. YouTube's community guidelines state that they do not allow
content that shares, threatens to share, or encourages others to share non-public personally identifiable information, PII. Personally identifiable information includes, but isn't limited to, home addresses, email addresses, sign-in credentials, like a username or password, phone numbers, passport numbers, medical records, or bank account information.
Yes, it is true that the guidelines state that what is against their terms is uploading videos to YouTube that do these things. However, Sniper Wolf, a massive creator on YouTube, shared another YouTuber's home without their consent to millions of strangers. There's no argument to be made that this is not an issue relevant to YouTube, simply because the violation itself happened on Instagram. A principled approach to standing against this kind of behavior would have consequences for a creator, regardless of which platform the doxing happened on, but it took days of being hounded after by Jax Films for them to do anything at all. And what they did was give her a temporary suspension on her monetization. Not even a strike to her channel. Compare this to my fellow creator Daniel Goldhorn, who just went through the ordeal of having every video on his channel completely demonetized without warning for, quote, reusing content, something he did not do. Reasons why the automated processes of YouTube would do this to him were not made clear, and while he was able to successfully make an appeal video that got him his monetization back, it took significant effort and caused him genuine distress and concern. This is also not an isolated incident, as another YouTuber I follow, who goes by Scully by the Sea, faced a similar issue and is still dealing with it now, at time of writing. As for Daniel, if he was reusing content by commenting and analyzing media using his personal avatar, why on earth wasn't Sniper Wolf for just watching other creators' videos? But more relevant to this essay, demonetizing an entire channel for months before they can reapply to the partner program with no warning and no concern for the impact on the creator is seemingly acceptable collateral damage for a creator of Daniel's size or Scully's, but Sniper Wolf can blatantly violate YouTube's rules, and the worst she gets is temporary demonetization. All she has to do is wait it out, and the consequences will disappear on their own. In the meantime, YouTube, coincidentally, continues to receive money from every single ad playing for every one of her 34.3 million subscribers. Monetization or no, those ads still play. However, if my argument for this decision being rooted in monetary politics isn't good enough for you to recognize bias due to the wording of the community guidelines, making this a technicality rather than a definite violation, there is an example that is more clearly breaking the rules on this platform. Matt Walsh is a host of The Daily Wire, a right-wing so-called news site, and he has flourished on YouTube. He currently stands at 2.82 million subscribers, while The Daily Wire, which churns out similar content, again using the term content intentionally here, stands at 3.28 million subscribers. On YouTube, protected groups under the platform's hate speech policy include age, caste, disability, ethnicity, gender identity and expression, nationality, race, immigration status, religion, sex/gender, sexual orientation, victims of a major violent event and their kin, and veteran status. YouTube's hate speech policy includes statements against hosting videos that, among other concerns, encourage violence against individuals or groups based on their protected group status.
Okay, you could take the drag perverts in their thongs and just throw them right into jail. We'll see how sexually expressive they want to be in that environment. And then you take the kids away from the parents and you throw the parents into jail right alongside them. That's how we have to respond. Because these perverts are not going to stop on their own. They will only get more brazen. We have to stop them aggressively, by force, by law.
Incite hatred against individuals or groups based on their protected group status.
Bringing a homeless guy into your home could have disastrous results for you, your family, your home. And in fact, it's like almost certain to have disastrous results. Bringing in homeless immigrants into your home, that is just as dangerous. But government officials know that they'll be protected by the media when things go south. So if some citizen decides to house a migrant and then the migrant kills or rapes that person or destroys the house or all of the above, the media will try its best to ignore it.
Dehumanization of individuals or groups by calling them subhuman, comparing them to animals, insects, pests, disease, or any other non-human entity based on their protected group status.
And when I consider that my own children must inherit this culture, that Dylan Mulvaney and his ilk will prey upon my children and try to turn my own sons and daughters into mutilated, mutant, self-loathing, hollow, twisted shells, just like themselves, well, my anger then turns into more of a boiling rage.
Praise or glorification of violence against individuals or groups based on their protected group status.
And of course, when I say natives, and I say that term, but the tribes that lived on this continent when the conquistadors arrived were themselves not native to this continent. They came here and killed whoever was there first. But in any event, conquering them was the right decision for all of humanity.
Use of racial, religious, or other slurs and stereotypes that incite or promote hatred based on protected group status. This can take the form of speech, text, or imagery promoting these stereotypes or treating them as factual.
As we've talked about earlier in the week, before colonization, the natives were ripping the hearts out of children as offerings to their sun gods.
Claim that individuals or groups are physically or mentally inferior, deficient, or diseased based on their protected group status. This includes statements that one group is less than another, calling them less intelligent, less capable, or damaged. This also includes calls for the subjugation or domination, based on their protected group status.
The organizers put out this statement. As mothers with young toddlers and one of us heavily pregnant, this has become more stress than we're able to deal with right now. These trolls specifically have a problem with drag artists and non-binary performers performing for children. Well, there's a lot going on. We can assume that the performers are perverts who get a sexual thrill out of exposing themselves to children. The parents are sick, twisted freaks who signal their allegiance to the woke religion by offering up their children in this way.
Use of conspiratorial claims that individuals or groups are evil, corrupt, or malicious based on their protected group status.
In fact, there is video evidence of children being harmed at drag shows. Every single child who's ever attended one has been harmed. They are all abuse victims. This is abusive inherently by its nature to involve children in something like this. There's also the overarching intention to desensitize and confuse children, to induct them into the left's sexual pathologies and obsessions from a very young age, to groom them, in other words. So there are varied motivations for all these adults, but one thing that they have in common is that they should all be sitting in a prison cell right now. And we will know that we have restored some semblance of sanity and dignity in our culture when, but not until, we start seeing law enforcement officers swarming these kinds of events, handcuffing every adult in the room, and frog marching them out of the building and into a prison cell.
To show that this isn't just a YouTube problem, there are two contrasting decisions from Meta on which ads to ban from Facebook. As reported by Board Game Wire earlier this month, as of time of writing, ads for a widely praised board game about women's right to vote have been repeatedly denied on the basis of it being a sensitive social issue.
Fort Circle founder Kevin Bertram told Board Game Wire that Facebook ads for the campaign he has been submitting since the start of the new year are all being rejected after a very short amount of time on the site. The automated response Bertram is receiving from Facebook says the ads are being rejected because they either mention a politician or are about sensitive social issues which could influence how people vote and may impact the outcome of an election or pending legislation. His requests for review have also all been rejected. Bertram said Facebook has, of course, ignored any requests for information, so I do not know for sure it is a human taking the ads down, but that is what appears to be happening.
If celebrating women's right to vote is going to impact upcoming legislation, that's a problem with the legislation, not the right to vote that suffragists fought so hard for, and that has been a settled constitutional right for so very long. Comparatively, Meta has earned over $1 million from ads they allowed on their platforms for the Daily Wire's recent film Lady Ballers. Lady Ballers and the Daily Wire make no attempt to hide the vitriol for the trans community that the film is built on, with even its marketing going out of its way to make it clear that the movie is about laughing at the very notion trans people exist. Even absent of any hate speech policies that these ads may violate, this is arguably a far more sensitive issue that could influence how people vote or impact the outcome of an election or pending legislation than a board game about a fundamental right women have had for decades. As covered by Media Matters,
since November 27th, Meta has earned over $1.6 million from ads the Daily Wire has run to promote its first feature-length comedy, Lady Ballers, a movie pushing anti-trans rhetoric about women's sports. Meta has a record of failing to adequately moderate anti-LGBTQ content and has profited from anti-trans Daily Wire ads in the past, earning over $5 million on such ads from June 2018 to March 2023.
I will not argue that these biases towards the ads or videos that are protected are always intentional or even actively malicious, but it is undeniable that they exist, and certainly seen to be influenced and even sometimes completely controlled by the monetary politics of those at the most influential levels of a given company. The second major difference between social media and a traditional public forum is algorithms, but I will save discussion about that for the next section when we talk about how to actually address these issues. Ads, algorithms, creator treatment, and user experiences, all guided by monetary politics. Journalism has been facing increasing difficulties since the birth of the internet, and the struggle to remain sustainable has introduced a variety of factors influenced by monetary politics. Where once newspapers could rely on people and businesses alike buying ad space as a separate, sustainable source of income, as the internet grew and ads became a business unto themselves, tech giants like Google or Facebook have inserted themselves as intermediaries between the news and its intended audience to siphon off much of that income for themselves. The internet has also opened journalism up for the masses, but not all who call themselves journalists today hold themselves to journalistic standards. This often results in cheap, easy clickbait articles fine-tuned for algorithmic optimization that traditional news outlets have struggled to compete with. Searching on Google or any given search engine doesn't guarantee the best or most accurate articles, just the ones most optimized for the code to pick up on and prioritize for maximum potential of clickage. The financial incentives and needs that these new issues have introduced for news outlets often leads to the side effect of spreading a narrative of a much darker and scarier world than actually exists, ignoring stories from underrepresented groups they believe won't be as attractive to the majority, spinning stories to feed biases, and other compromises on journalistic ethics. Ads are not just often evolving into a main priority for outlets, but are actually being integrated into stories being reported. Often, to gain the most money from the advertising, news organizations are incentivized to pursue sensationalist headlines, as particularly dark or depressing or sad headlines create strong emotional reactions that often make people feel obligated to click on the article, and thus drives up the algorithmic preferences for it, and or to make their ads appear more like credible journalism so that the intended audience is more likely to trust the item being advertised than they would be with a flashing banner ad or pop-up or other obvious advertising attempts. John Oliver discusses the crises modern journalism faces on Last Week Tonight's episode on crime reporting, native advertising, and of course his episode on journalism itself. In the episode on crime reporting, Oliver notes that crime stories, especially those that indicated imminent threat to the viewers/readers, have long been seen as cheap, easy stories to report on that drive ratings. By heightening the sensationalism and making those trying to stay informed feel that the dangers being reported on could or do directly affect their own safety or the safety of those they care about, these stories suck people in. Making the world feel less safe than it is bolsters their bottom line. The term, "if it bleeds, it leads," was even the motto of crime reporting back when it was first gaining traction. And even if that motto has been dropped, a quick look at some of today's headlines makes it clear the philosophy has had a lasting impact. John Oliver and his team may have focused that video on crime reporting, but assuming the factors that cause crime reporting to increase ratings hold true across most topics, it makes things pretty clear why our headlines are often so full of negativity, regardless of the substance of the actual articles. Now, admittedly, there are plenty of bad things happening in the world, and journalists do have a responsibility to keep us informed, but they also have a responsibility to the truth, and the truth is that good things happen too. Wars and murder and fascism and tragedy are not the only important things in the world. And without joy and knowledge of success against these forces, many people find themselves not so much informed as demoralized. As David Lenhart of the New York Times wrote back in 2021 during the height of the pandemic about COVID-19 coverage,
"If we're constantly telling a negative story, we are not giving our audience the most accurate portrait of reality. We are shading it. We are doing a good job of telling you why COVID cases are rising in some places and how the vaccines are imperfect, but not such a good job of explaining why cases are falling elsewhere or how the vaccines are saving lives. Perhaps most importantly, however, we are not being clear about which COVID developments are truly alarming."
The human negativity bias leads to dour headlines and demoralizing information overload, yet it also leads to clicks and ad revenue. In fact, news outlets are also increasingly controlled by advertising. As John Oliver and his team report in their episode on journalism, the once strong barriers between the business and reporting sides of news outlets have become quite fragile and in some cases taken down completely thanks to leadership changes, including members of the 1% who have bought newspapers, supposedly in order to save them, but often without the necessary experience to run them effectively, and more than willing to lay off vital staff when the paper is struggling, rather than use their own money to address the issues. All these lead to excessive layoffs, which means less reporters and editors to fact-check or otherwise maintain quality journalism, and to uphold ethical standards. Clickbait and divisive opinion pieces end up being relied upon just to simply keep the lights on, even for the papers owned by billionaires, just so that any quality journalism can be pursued. To truly dig into the struggles of the news industry and its relationship to the advertising industry would be a massive video all its own, and I'm really no expert nor am I a journalist myself. So I suggest watching the recent as of time of writing upload from Some More News on the subject, and checking out some of the sources in my bibliography. Personally, alongside that video and the videos from John Oliver and his team, I recommend the articles How Algorithms Decide the News You See by Jihi Jolly, Why the News is So Negative and What We Can Do About It by Dylan Matthews, The Media Exaggerates Negative News, This Distortion Has Consequences by Steven Pinker, How Craigslist Killed the Newspaper's Golden Goose by John Rainan, Study Sheds Light on How Online News Algorithms Can Skew Your Picture of Reality by Eric W. Dolan, How Local News Outlets Fail to Serve Black Audiences by Samuel Robinson, and the study Negativity Drives Online News Consumption. Just to start. And let me know if you're interested in a video that explores the information age, the human negativity bias, and the subsequent necessary cultivation of hope and joy. Regardless, when it comes to the modern journalistic crises, suffice to say, barriers between business and journalism were once recognized as so important they were referred to as the separation between church and state. But corporate interests, new owners, intermediaries like search engines and social media sites, and general struggles with sustainability have been making it harder and harder to maintain a high ethical standard for journalism. And that has the dangerous result that the news we rely on is now often guided, influenced, and sometimes outright controlled by monetary politics, which then itself feeds on the human negativity bias. Entertainment gatekeepers like Disney, Netflix, and Warner Bros. Discovery control speech through which projects they give the green light and from which talent, what's allowed into the project from the executives, and how accessible the project is to the public, as well as how well they market the work of the talent once it's actually finished. All these factors are determined by the type of risk versus reward analysis that is the core of monetary politics. While all the companies I'll mention operate in many mediums, here I'm going to focus on film and television, as what is happening there is the clearest example of the power these companies have as gatekeepers. Hollywood studios like Paramount and Disney have been leaning more and more into movie and television slates of mostly intellectual property with established brand loyalty, forcing even stories about extremely personal experiences to have to exist within a structure decided by risk versus reward analysis in order to appeal to as wide an audience as possible. Otherwise, executives don't feel they can justify the money being spent on it, and even if a story gets made, there's no guarantee it will be marketed in a way that ensures the public knows about and is excited for it. Other examples of the way these gatekeepers control speech include the constant cancellations of interesting and compelling original shows with passionate fan bases on various streaming services, but particularly Netflix, notes from executives that tamper down representation to less than the bare minimum as detailed by the open letter from Pixar animators from 2022, and the trend of removing original films and shows in their entirety from the streaming service they were exclusive to, a trend embraced by the likes of Warner Bros. Discovery, Disney, and Paramount. Warner Bros. Discovery even recently came close to getting Sony to actively revoke access to over 100 TV shows through the PlayStation Store, including the access of those who had already purchased episodes of television within the approximately 1,317 seasons of television that would have been removed. The ability to do so is concerning, to put it mildly. But Sony was able to extend their license for at least another 30 months, then just recently decided that in merging the animation services Funimation and Crunchyroll, longtime Funimation subscribers will not only face a significant upcharge, but will completely lose access to the virtual library of media that they were supposed to own forever, in Funimation's own words. Creative expression is an incredibly important part of freedom of speech, but it has become more and more subject to the results of the gatekeepers' calculations concerning monetary politics. Depending on the value certain talent brings to the table, monetary politics may determine that they receive better treatment, including more creative freedom. As an example of the disparity in treatment due to monetary politics, Netflix has canceled an absurd amount of seemingly extremely popular shows such as Inside Job or 1899, yet are dedicated to ordering more and more specials from comedians that have caused genuine harm like Dave Chappelle, as well as other comedians with material that touches on similar talking points like Ricky Gervais. Speaking of comedy, it is often a highly debated subject when it comes to what speech is acceptable, but it's not often actually a debate about the First Amendment. Comedians have the right to say what they like, but so do audiences. Criticism and backlash are consequences to speech that audiences find appalling, not necessarily censorship, and certainly not violations of the First Amendment, as the government is rarely involved. Quite frankly, the audience's job is not to find the comedian funny, and it is then the comedian's job to come up with jokes that are better received. If, as a comedian, you have found yourself incapable of coming up with new jokes that are better received, maybe you're just not as good a comedian as you thought you were. There are many high-profile comedians who claim to be canceled or censored, while literally being paid to say the things they're complaining about not being able to say, with one of the most recent and high-profile examples being formerly widely praised comedian Dave Chappelle. In the middle of his supposed cancellation for his transphobic talking points in his 2019 Netflix stand-up special The Closer, among receiving significant support, especially from several other comedians, Chappelle was brought on to give the opening monologue for SNL. Netflix co-CEO Ted Sarandos defended him wholeheartedly, citing creative freedom, as well as, more relevant to this essay, the value Chappelle brings Netflix.
On October 8th, Netflix co-CEO Ted Sarandos responded to the questions in an internal email. "It never feels good when people are hurting, especially our colleagues," he wrote. "You should also be aware that some talent may join third parties in asking us to remove the show in the coming days, which we are not going to do." Sarandos also said that Chappelle's last special, Sticks and Stones, is Netflix's most watched, stickiest, and most award-winning stand-up special to date. Several of you have also asked where we draw the line on hate. We don't allow titles on Netflix that are designed to incite hate or violence, and we don't believe The Closer crosses that line. I recognize, however, that distinguishing between commentary and harm is hard, especially with stand-up comedy, which exists to push boundaries. Some people find the art of stand-up to be mean-spirited, but our members enjoy it, and it's an important part of our content offering.
As of writing, Chappelle recently released his follow-up to The Closer, in which he doubled down on transphobia.
God forbid I ever go to jail, but if I do, I hope it's in California. Because as soon as the judge sentenced me, I'll be like, Your Honor, before you sentence me, I just went to court to know I identify as a woman. Send me to women's jail. And as soon as I get in there, you know what I'm gonna be doing? Give me a fruit cocktail, bitch, before I knock your motherfucking teeth out. I'm a girl just like you, bitch. Come over here and suck this girl dick I got. Don't make me explain myself. I'm a girl.
As well as threw in some mocking of the disabled community.
I ain't doing trans jokes no more. You know what I'm gonna do tonight? Tonight, I'm doing all handicap jokes. Well, they're not as organized as the gays. And I love punching down. There's probably a handicap in the back right now, because that's where they usually make them sit. What
an asshole!
Also at time of writing, there have been no statement from Netflix executives, Sarandos or otherwise, on the reignited backlash to this material. There are many, though not as often as it may sometimes seem, who argue that those upset at material like this can't take a joke or are too sensitive. Arguments often invoked not just for comedians, but often for casual uses of hurtful language as well. For example, Trump's statement on air that he has taken opportunities to and enjoyed grabbing women by the pussy, publicly admitting to sexual assault, has sometimes been cited by his supporters as a joke or as locker room talk, a term for misogynistic language supposedly exchanged and enjoyed by men as a form of bonding, and one natural and normal for men to participate in.
I think it's just locker room talk. Really, what does that mean? Guys in the bar talk that way when they see a pretty girl. What are you gonna say?
It's locker room talk. That's what boys do. It was stupid bragging men talk. Men brag.
This leads to claims that those upset over it are being too sensitive to something not meant to be taken seriously, or that they wish to stifle the speech of those who simply hold a different opinion. On a personal level, I feel if you know something is offensive, and you say it anyway, you do not have the right to be upset when people are offended. You knew ahead of time that that would be the response. Ted Sarandos, or whatever the hell, is right that comedy and stand-up in particular are important parts of culture that must be protected and preserved. And historically, it's had moments that were absolutely vital to the progression of culture and human rights. For more details, check out this video on Lenny Bruce. And he's also right that it's hard to know when comedy crosses over into harm. However, I would say if hundreds of your employees walk out in a peaceful protest to indicate how hurt they feel, that's a decent hint. Either way, studios and production houses like Netflix, Disney, Paramount, Warner Bros. Discovery, and even Amazon and Apple these days pick and choose the creative expression the public is most likely to receive, and they do so based on the value they believe it will bring them and their shareholders. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Studios put the most marketing behind the blockbusters and IP-driven films and established franchises and talent because they believe they can get the most money from it, and barely put the money in to market anything else. which means the audience is barely aware of anything else, which means the original and non-blockbuster movies aren't as successful, which disincentivizes the studios from putting their money into them, and slowly it became that studios decide which films they want to make, and then to make them, approach filmmakers and storytellers, announcing films long before writers or directors are finalized, rather than storytellers coming up with ideas and figuring out how to bring those ideas to life. As is made clear by this, often creative expression is directly determined through gatekeepers and monetary politics. It's been clear for quite some time that the way we treat speech is fundamentally flawed, but demanding censorship of dangerous speech is oftentimes dangerous in itself, regardless of where that censorship comes from, because it always comes from those with power, and those with power don't necessarily have the public's interests at heart. Even so, something must be done. Things must change. And while monetary politics are a significant hurdle, understanding what they are and how they affect the challenges we face is far from useless, because now we know where to spend our energy trying to change things. Here are 3 of my personal suggestions on where to spend our limited energy to address the problems with speech we have been experiencing so often in the modern day. The first place that could use our focus is the use of deplatforming to address those using their speech to pursue harm. There have been studies that showcase that genuine efforts to take away the platforms of those who inspire stochastic terrorism actively decrease the power they hold. It's not perfect. There are limits to what this can accomplish, particularly for those with the most power or with heavy backers. And it does often send extremists to more fringe platforms. But it's not a pointless exercise, and it does limit the reach of radicalization and make platforms safer. Shagan Haver, Christian Boylston, Dee Yang, and Emmy Bruckman, I hope I pronounced those correctly, determine in their research paper evaluating the effectiveness of deplatforming as a moderation strategy on Twitter.
Conversations around influencers are reduced. Our results show that deplatforming significantly reduced the number of postings about these influencers. Additionally, the number of new users and unique users posting about them declined dramatically. Thus, we conclude that deplatforming helped reduce the overall impact of these influencers on the platform. Another promising moderation strategy to reduce the impact of offensive influencers could be to temporarily limit the number of replies they receive, or to disable autocompletion of their handles when tweets are composed. This milder intervention could help encourage influencers to improve their behavior so as to avoid getting deplatformed. Spread of offensive ideas associated with influencers are reduced. We analyzed the spread of many offensive ideas associated with deplatformed influencers. Activity and toxicity levels of supporters are reduced. Deplatforming influencers could have fired up their supporters and raised their posting activity and toxicity levels. Our analysis of the long-term activity of their supporters reveals that deplatforming helped reduce their overall posting activity and toxicity levels. Thus, deplatforming can have wide-ranging and longer-term positive consequences on platform health.
All this to say, well, it may not always seem like it, and there are some exceptions. Deplatforming is a useful and effective method of depowering hateful individuals. It is, however, not enough purely on its own. The second goal I suggest spending our energy on achieving is changing the way algorithms are designed and used. Algorithms on social media sites are designed to keep viewers on the site first and foremost, with safety as a distant second priority. Due to the nature of their size, platforms like Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, or TikTok cannot manage all the material on their sites without the help of automation. So by no means am I advocating for discarding algorithms or other forms of automated moderation altogether. However, considering all the lack of communication and/or warning about the changes to guidelines required to be followed in order to be advertiser-friendly, the majority of creators are constantly having to change their speech to suit the demands of a few just to have the slightest chance to be heard, let alone have the effort they put into their work recognized as labor worth being paid for.
On this app, if I put on the right wig and the right set of colored contacts, maybe someone could mistake me for a white girl with an aggressive tan. I named this alter ego Rachel. I changed absolutely nothing about my content, nothing about the delivery or anything. That on Wednesdays, my appearance would be Rachel. 3 weeks I did this. I looked at my analytics, and for 3 weeks on Wednesday, there would be a very noticeable peak of views.
please check out this amazing video from Tails the Introvert. It goes into fantastic detail about how being advertising friendly acts as a sort of modern day Hays Code. That is, not directly censoring anyone through force or law, but creating guidelines that, if not followed, can risk creators' jobs and financial stability by jamming the distribution system. Back then it was the studios, and now today, it's the algorithm. There are highly intelligent people in huge teams working at most of these companies to make their sites safer. But the simple reality is that the people actually in charge of these companies have much more incentive and pressure to please shareholders than they do to fund the tools needed to make their websites genuinely safer in any truly meaningful way. As former head of Twitter Trust and Safety, Del Harvey, she left by the end of 2021, told Laura Good at Wired,
I made requests in 2010 for functionalities that did not get implemented in many instances till a decade plus later, such as multiple account detection and returning accounts. If you're a multiple time violator, how do we make sure you stop without going down this weird path of, well, we aren't sure if this is the best use of resources, so instead we will do nothing in that realm and instead come up with a new product feature. Because it was growth at all costs and safety eventually. When trust and safety is going well, no one thinks about it or talks about it. And when trust and safety is going poorly, it's usually something that leadership wants to blame on policies. Quite frankly, policies are going to be a band-aid if your product isn't being designed in a way that actually doesn't encourage abuse.
Ultimately, algorithms and the like create a situation where people share the public square, but some people are given megaphones and loudspeakers that make sure their words are heard loud and clear, while others are given a small cardboard box to stand on 50 feet away from the crowd and no mic or sound system. Amendments to Section 230, to adjust it to problems that were not foreseen when it was first created, do have a precedent. The biggest example of one of these exceptions was the anti-human trafficking bill known as FOSTA SESTA, a bill that promised to protect sex workers from trafficking, yet has only increased the dangers of their profession. I might do a video on the treatment of sex workers at some point because I've learned a lot recently and... hoo boy. But the point is, to develop a new exemption to Section 230 would have to be extremely thought out and would need to actively consult the most affected people, in a way that lawmakers did not consult sex workers when they were creating FOSTA SESTA.